Hey guys, and welcome back to another Conan Exiles video. Today we are on the Exile lands building the Black Temple, a worship place of the great spider god Zath. The requirements for this build are on screen now. It is indeed mod free, though it does require the no stability loss modifier. It could be created without this modifier, though it would be very difficult, but I do think it's possible. So without further ado, let's get started. As you've already seen in the title, this is indeed a speed build. As with the usual format, we'll be going over the ideas, inspirations and techniques behind this build, alongside a cinematic showcase of the Black Temple towards the end of the video. Firstly, there's something really important I wanted to cover, and that is the technical process throughout this video that I did want to briefly explain. It's something I call set piecing, and I believe it's a very valuable skill to learn, especially for larger builds like these. Set piecing is the idea of having segments of the build, usually exterior facade elements, that are easy to replicate. They're used to make the build more interesting and are designed to be simpler to implement than complex additions that are interwoven into the build. They're easy to recreate, designed to be attached to structures rather than merging into them, and they can often be joined together but not always. There is a lot of set piecing in this build, in which you'll see me build the first design in full, and then between cuts I will replicate that exact build on all other areas. You'll mainly see this on the gateways of the build and on the corner towers. So onto the inspiration. It's been a good while since I built a temple, but I always have a soft spot for them, as one of my first ideas for Conan builds back in 2019 was to build a temple for each god. I've since built multiple temples over the years, but I don't feel like I've done justice for Zath the spider god. I built a temple to him about 2 or 3 years ago when Siptar came out, and, well, to be honest, it wasn't that good. I also covered him not too long ago in a lore video, I'd say one of the better god-focused lore videos in my opinion, and in that video I went over the history of Zath and his worship in Zamora. Specifically, Zath's main temple is found in the city of Yazud. It is known as the Temple of Yazud and is described as a grand marble-domed structure. Therefore, I wanted to have my own spin on a grand temple to Zath, somewhat in the spirit of the Yazud temple. Of course, I hear the word dome and I shudder. Domes are pretty much impossible in Conan, outside of mods, and smaller domes in the Turanian set, so I immediately knew that unfortunately wasn't doable. However, I did think that there was still a way to make the temple look grand and do justice to the spider god Zath. Funnily enough, probably 10 or 20 minutes later, I briefly popped onto Twitter while I was yet again distracted, and I stumbled across a few different concept art pictures on my feed from an account I didn't follow, including this one, which gave me the rough inspiration for the exterior design of the build. The concept art does look quite a bit like Lemurian architecture, but it wasn't so much the style I was looking at and more the key features of the build. I did very briefly debate what material set I wanted to use with this design and quickly settled upon Stormglass. It's one of my favourite building sets, but I did just kind of envision this build in Stormglass, and thus I used that set with some Turanian elements too. Aside from the set piece additions on the exterior, this build is fairly unremarkable in terms of difficulty, as it's basically just a huge circle. The only part that was a bit challenging was settling this circular base plate onto a square foundation. This isn't something I'd usually do, but I did think it would suit this design well, so I went for it. I basically built pillars up 2 tiles high, built out the circular base plate as big as I needed, and then at a tile below I built a huge square base plate beneath it and used ceilings and walls to mask the gaps between the ceiling tiles. I didn't actually expect this to work, but it worked pretty well. Again, not something I'd regularly use because it's quite confusing to explain and, well, not entirely practical, but it does work well for builds like this. Overall, considering this build was born out of an idea that kind of just sparked into my head, alongside a bit of concept art that popped up in my Twitter feed, this build turned out really nicely. It's definitely a more ornate build, not something you'd typically construct in a PvE or even a roleplay setting, though I suppose it could be useful as a server hub of sorts, especially if you changed it from a temple to a sort of gathering place or a portal hub. It is definitely a good build though, and I'm happy that I've finally been able to give a good temple to the spider god himself. Thank you for watching. As with previous speed builds, I'll let the rest of the construction phase play out, and then we'll take a cinematic look at the final finished design, including some pretty cool nighttime shots. As always, a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and enjoy the rest of the build.